I'm almost ashamed to say that I hadn't played Max Payne 2 prior to this week. I've loved the original Max Payne for years, and I even played through the third game back when it came out, but for whatever reason I never got around to Max Payne 2. Believe me, I'm kicking myself for it, and that's because Max Payne 2 is excellent. It expands on the first game on so many fronts, and it is, as of this week, my favorite game in the series. So the first game was a universal success. It sold millions upon millions of copies and won a ton of awards. This success brings both money and a sequel to the table, and just after 2 years since the first game's release, Max Payne 2: The Fall of Max Payne was released. The improved budget is immediately noticeable. Along with everything simply looking nicer, the game has a fully utilized physics system. Rooms are filled with all sorts of furniture, and boxes, often coupled with explosives, are ready to send flying across the room. Where the first game relied only on its particle system to create that John Woo style of visually chaotic shootouts, Max Payne 2 has both an improved particle system and physics objects to satisfy that itch, and it by all means succeeds. This physics system also brings ragdoll physics to the characters. This game came out in 2003, early days for ragdoll physics, and there's absolutely nothing as amazing as old school ragdoll physics. Maybe I'm a sick person, but it's incredibly satisfying dual submachine gunning a guy off a building in slow motion. The combat overall can be described as just that, satisfying. The gunplay is vastly similar to the first game, which I recently reviewed. I won't re-explain the fundamentals of it because I'm admittedly quite a lazy person. Instead, let's look at the differences and tweaks they made. Performing the shoot-dodge maneuver we all know and love no longer depletes your adrenaline level, as it isn't nearly as useful as going into bullet time without diving, as in just running around in slow motion. Doing this does deplete the hourglass, and the enemies in the game slow to a crawl whilst you move basically at the same speed. It's a lot of fun, and it's a lot more useful than it was in the first game. Once you've killed enough enemies, the hourglass would turn yellow and slow down time even more, making bullet time appropriately chaotic and addictive. Also, the reload animation during bullet time is undeniably awesome. The signature shoot dodge is also more useful, as you can alter your trajectory slightly in midair, and diving into enemies knocks them down. The hourglass adrenaline meter regens both when you kill enemies like in the first game, but now it also slowly regens when you're not using bullet time. This is a change I don't actually appreciate all that much, as I enjoyed strategically choosing when to use my bullet time in order to make full use of it in the first game. Now the question isn't when you're going to use bullet time, but how. Overall, I'd say the gunplay is better. It feels more responsive, and having melee and grenades binded to a secondary attack button is great. The tweaks to the bullet time are welcome for variety's sake, but I would not say that bullet time is better than it was in the first game, just different. I had 3 main complaints about the first game. The first one was the platforming segments, and thankfully they're no longer an issue. There is still platforming in Max Payne 2, but it's minimalized and it doesn't feel out of place. Also, Max controls a little better, making them less unforgiving. The second complaint I had was the difficulty curve, which quite frankly has been fixed. In the first game, it just felt a bit flat. Max Payne 2 starts fairly easy and progressively gets harder, like it should. The other complaint I had was the quick save system. This is back, and it functions exactly like it did before. I still prefer having the quick save system than no save system at all during the levels, but I think that a frequent checkpoint system would have been the perfect solution. That said, I've come across a lot of people who defend quick saving and get upset when games don't include it. I'm just not one of those people, I guess. What brings Max Payne 2 from good to great is the story and storytelling. The premise here is that Max rejoins the police force in order to distract himself from his own past and quickly gets tangled up in a whole new web of conspiracies. Without spoiling anything, Max Payne 2 does a great job of hooking you in. It's not long before you want to know what's going on and what's going to happen, and it's paced perfectly and I love it. The incredible graphic novel panels are back and are just as awesome. With the bigger budget also comes more in-engine cutscenes than the first game. Although some feel a little unnecessary, the in-engine cutscenes are used fairly well, but they haven't aged as well as the graphic novel sequences, which are used to full effect.
I was hurt. My crime, what I had done, was like a hungry pit behind me. I had to run, get as far away from it as possible.
Mona Sachs plays a key role in Max Payne 2 as Max's love interest. The game does an impressive job of making you as a player care about her without actually knowing much about her. Along with her characterization through dialogue, interactions, and Max's inner monologues, the game has you both playing alongside her and playing as her. She's presented as both capable and vulnerable. When playing as Max, you'll be thanking her often as she takes out enemies for you, which sometimes saves your life. When playing as Mona, you're often protecting Max, who has his own life bar alongside Mona's, making protecting him a very real task. Mona is established as one of Max's only real reasons to live, and their gameplay sequences together really allow that idea to hit home, as Max is often relying on Mona to survive. Max and Mona aren't only surviving all the chaos with each other, they're surviving because of each other. As subjective as it sounds, I do think the story is simply better. I like the character-driven twists more, and I felt that the characters themselves were more fleshed out. The game is fundamentally still a character study of Max, now with a focus put on his relationship with Mona, and the story acts as a catalyst for this. The nightmare sequences are back, and whilst they aren't quite as creepy or memorable, they are definitely more surreal and intentionally raise a lot of questions regarding Max's mental state. I was glad to see them return. Perhaps one of the things I like most about Max Payne 2 is that it's a sequel that feels like it should exist. Whilst both games have their own story arcs, Payne's entire character arc starts at the beginning of the original Max Payne and ends at the end of Max Payne 2. The two games go hand in hand and are both better off for it. It kinda reminds me of the Kill Bill films. One thing I was disappointed about was the length of the game, as it's even shorter than the first game. As I said, the game has excellent pacing and the length feels appropriate for the story, but I didn't want Max Payne 2 to end simply because I was enjoying it so much. Before I wrap this review off, I just want to mention the soundtrack and the sound design, which are both amazing. The music conveys appropriate emotion when it needs to, the voice acting is as impressive as ever, and the sound effects were convincing and atmospheric. There are a few sequences set inside a building as it rains outside, and it was such a convincing sound of rain on the roof that I took my headphones off to check if it was raining multiple times. Count me impressed.
The season finale of Lords and Ladies.
If you can't already tell, I sorta like Max Payne 2. A lot. It's a pretty hard game to fold, and it improves upon the first game on an array of different fronts, which is quite something considering how good the first game is. If you're like I was and are stupid enough not to play this game yet, you have every reason to install it right now and have a blast, unless of course you haven't played the first game yet. If that's the case, install it right now and have a blast, because Max Payne and Max Payne 2 are simply stunning.